Yeah,
Great.
my name is Garry Radcliffe, and I'm the commercial lead within the Commercial Telecoms department at TfL. I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Andrew Conway, who is the Director of Solutions and Innovation at BAI Communications, as we talk about mobile phone coverage on the tube. BAI, after a rigorous tender process, has been chosen as the long-term partner for TfL in fulfilling one of the key objectives of the Mayor's transport strategy, and that is to deliver mobile coverage throughout the below-ground areas of the London Underground network, together with the broader utilisation of TfL's assets in improving connectivity across the capital. Understandably, when we think of TfL or Transport for London, the first thing that usually comes to mind is the London Underground, or more commonly known as the Tube. After all, it is one of the largest, oldest and most widely used public transport systems anywhere in the world. But TfL has a far wider remit than this. There are other rail operations within TfL, for instance, London Underground, TfL Rail, the Docklands Light Railway, and it is still expanding with the new extension to the Northern Line covering Nine Elms and Battersea Power Station, and the Elizabeth Line opening next year. It's not just about below ground. At surface level, TfL has also responsibility for many of the capital's bus services, the network of major roads throughout London, also known as the Red Route, Tramlink in the southern parts of London, and TfL also manages 8 of the piers along the River Thames. If you've ever crossed the river using the Emirates airline or ridden around London on a Santander cycle, that's TfL as well. Keeping London moving is not a small task though. In terms of numbers, there's somewhere around 950 trains running throughout 720 kilometres of rail network. There are over 9,000 buses carrying passengers across 675 different routes, and there are more than 6,000 traffic signals that orchestrate the more than 580 kilometres of the Red Route network. At TfL, every journey matters, and prior to the impact of the pandemic, this meant on average some 31 million journeys throughout London each day. Bringing mobile coverage to the tube is no easy task. In terms of size, we're talking about providing coverage to some 136 below ground stations and around 200 kilometres of tunnels. This is made more challenging by simply the sheer age of the network. The oldest parts of the London Underground originate from 1863, and when we think about that, telephony itself wasn't even thought of then, let alone mobile telephony, which would come some 100 years plus later. It's also made more challenging when we look at the way that the Underground has evolved. In the early days, building tunnels was a case of digging up a road, putting the tracks in, then putting the road back, which was commonly called cut and cover, or as we call subsurface design. This was then followed by what we more commonly associate the tube with, which is single bore tunnels that run deep underground. And I'm sure many of you have probably sat on trains whizzing through those tunnels, looking at the multitude of cables that go by inches from the window. It's also worth remembering that TfL is an operational railway, so working time is very limited. Obviously, working on the tracks when trains are going past is not an option. So working time is certainly limited to the non-operational hours, which is probably about a 4-hour slot in the evenings. And also, it's not the only activities happening during those hours. So there's also many competing activities for access during those times. The sheer size of the coverage required and the technical challenges it presents also makes this a very expensive undertaking. In seeking a solution that represented no cost to TfL, with our partner providing the required investment, it was important to us to take an approach that not only ensured alignment with our own ambitions, but also provide an opportunity for return on their investment. Against the background of ever-increasing data consumption and with communications technology becoming more IP-centric, it was also clear that other assets TfL had could be made available to improve the connectivity across the capital in an integrated fashion. To realise this benefit, we sought a partner who would take a neutral approach, offering a wholesale model enabling the benefit of increased connectivity to be maximised. As part of TfL's partnership with the Home Office and their ESMCP program to provide emergency services with coverage on the underground to replace the existing airway solution, TfL has already delivered passive enabling works at 65 below ground stations and installed some 400 kilometres of leaky feeder throughout the tunnels. We've also undertaken a successful 4G pilot on the eastern section of the Jubilee Line with the participation of all 4 UK mobile operators, which has been operational since March 2020. These activities will both help to reduce the technical risk of the build by providing valuable lessons learned, and will also reduce the time frame with the overall implementation program. I'll now hand over to Andrew Conway to describe how BAI Communications will make this a reality.
Thank you, Gary. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the globe. Thank you for that introduction, Gary. So my name is Andy Conway. I'm the Director of Solutions and Innovations at BAI Communications, based here in London at our Paddington HQ. And I've been working on the TfL project for a number of years in the design phase. And as Gary said, we've recently been announced as the successful concessionaire for the project. BAI itself, BAI Communications, we've been operating for just over 100 years, actually. Our origins are in Australia, in Sydney, and there we run the terrestrial broadcast network, the TV transmission network. And we also actually run the New South Wales Public Safety Network. So that's one of the world's largest by area government radio networks. For the past decade or so, we've been majority owned by the Canadian Pension Plan and Investment Board, CPPIB. And what you will see here on the map is our current geographical footprint. Australia, I've talked about. In Hong Kong, we also design and build the cellular infrastructure on that very large metro system. There, I think we're on now our 4th generation of technology, 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G on the Hong Kong metro. More recently, we won a concession in New York. That was a 27-year partnership with the Transport Authority to provide cellular services and Wi-Fi services on the underground. And then again, a couple of years back, we have a similar construct now in the Toronto subway. And so finally, here we are now in London. And at the bottom there, with the logos, the icons, you'll see the particular sectors that we play in, that I've gone through. Really, the transport domain in particular, and the public safety area. Increasingly as well, we are moving into adjacent markets next to transportation corridors, smart cities, and IoT technology. So that's BAI in a nutshell. And this next slide really talks about the overall topology of the solution that we're deploying within London. So here at the bottom of the diagram, you'll see the trains going through those tunnels that Garry talked about. About 50% of London Underground is actually underground. So there's 136 stations out of the total of the 270 across Greater London. Those 136 stations are by and large in central London, zones 1 and 2. We also have a cluster of stations out towards the west, towards Heathrow, and then we have tendrils of the network extending particularly north and south. We've got some very long runs there in the tunnels, for example. I'm becoming a bit of a tube geek at the moment, but there's a very long continuous tunnel from Morden in the south up to East Finchley in the north, for example. So that's like a 17-mile continuous run. So it's an absolutely massive network geographically. And what you'll see there is that in addition to the commercial mobile service deployed on the underground, there are a number of other service lines that we talk about. Public Wi-Fi, for example, which is down on the tube already, which we would take over the running of. And also then deployment of more optical fiber within the network, which I'll talk about. And then finally, the 9 red dots above, this is where we're actually building out small edge data centers, or base station hotels, as we call them. This is so that the mobile network operators, the MNOs, can take their base stations off TfL premise and drive the system from the edge data centers.
Just to let you know, you have 4 minutes left before Q&A.
Thank you. Going under the hood, here we'll see sort of a typical base station hotel and how it's connected to the other base station hotels within the network. And that's powering through optical fiber a number of small radios that you'll see down in the stations. And as Gary said, there's already about 8 stations up and running on the Jubilee Line trial. The small radios in the station are called low power radio nodes, LRNs. And the job of the LRN is to rebroadcast the license frequency of the mobile network operators. And you'll see there that the MNO's kit itself is then housed safely offsite in the base station hotel, the BSH. And as Gary mentioned, then the signal is propagated through the platforms, the ticket halls, the connecting areas, and indeed the tunnels to provide that seamless, that ubiquitous mobile cellular coverage, and also along the coaxial cables that we've got underground, the radiating cables, or as we call them, leaky feeders, elongated cables to provide that coverage. So in a nutshell, I've talked about the mobile coverage in the stations and tunnels, and that will provide the cellular coverage on your smartphone across the networks, as well as providing the capability for the emergency services network. There's also the coexisting public Wi-Fi network, and then absolutely masses of new underground fiber. So, an underground footprint of fiber, which we are bringing up to points of presence above ground at all 136 stations. And then really, I think one of the most important things as well is access to TfL's streetscape assets. So over 80,000 assets above ground that we can help bring to the market in terms of providing small cell technology, particularly for the mobile network operators as mobile traffic grows. And we've still been seeing it grow about 45% compound annual growth rate. So every 2 years, mobile traffic is still growing. And really that new alternative fiber backbone network is coming to London to provide that mobile solution, as well as wider and greater connectivity and a smarter city in total to London. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We have one question in the queue, but before I read that out, I'd like to let everyone know that we're about to bring up a poll. This is your opportunity to rate the speaker and the talk. And while everyone's doing that, I'm going to read out the question in the queue. There's also an opportunity for people to raise their hand if they want to speak verbally. The first question is from Ed Daniel, and he says, for Garry, is the network design incorporating the ability to tap data for legal interception?
Thanks for the question, Ed. Actually, it's probably a better question for Andy. Andy, do you want to take it, or do you want me to?
Yeah, sure. I can make a start, and Garry, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But as a neutral host, the secret sauce of a neutral host really is the partnership angle. So we insert ourselves in between Transport for London, that own the train network, and then we talk back to the mobile network operators that provide a lot of the kit to broadcast the signal. In a way, you know, we as a neutral host, we're kind of the plumber, the smart plumber, but we don't have access or any kind of tap into the mobile network operator network. You know, the smarts is back with the mobile network operator community. So we, in that sense, we're a transparent pipe.
Excellent. Now we have 3 more questions that have come in, which is great. So I'm going to go in the order that they have been asked. The first one from Ian Chilton. Does this require buy-in from each MNO separately, or will they all have full coverage throughout?
So we're talking now to all 4 of the mobile network operators in the UK, and we're getting great engagement from them. Yes, absolutely right. You know, the 4 MNOs would sign up to and come onto the network, and as and when that happens, they would get that full coverage throughout. As I said, you know, the ticket halls, the connecting areas, the platforms, and also within the trains.
Super. So another question from David Morris. Is the part of the network in the tunnel the same cell site as that in a station, or a different cell site? Wondering how the handoff works between different areas of the underground.
Yeah, that's a good question from David, who I know, so I'll be in touch with him after this. Yeah, I mean, basically we're designing the system to, and maybe not everyone will know on the call, but we're designing the system using a guide called JOTS, Joint Operator Technical Specification, which is a forum, a collective made by the UK mobile network operators, and we're using that as our guide to build the system within the underground. Of course, there'll be areas perhaps where that's not possible because it's a unique environment and topology, but we're using that as our principle to design the system, and we're making sure that we can manage those handovers, which, you know, typically from our perspective are in the middle of the tunnel as the train is whizzing past.
Okay, we have 3 more questions, so let's see if we can do them all quickly in the time that we have available. One from James Delahunt. What is your procurement plan for the installations packages?
From a BAI perspective, now that we've been awarded the project from TfL, we've got a very active supply chain. We're already going through the pyramid of suppliers, and we've got all of our foundation suppliers in place. So, you know, we have relationships now with our installation partners, our design houses for some of the design that we do externally. And we've also now engaged and signed up with a number of active electronic equipment suppliers. But we are working through that supply chain, and you know, we're open to have conversations with the marketplace and take them through the procurement process.
Excellent. So then from Simon Beavers, he asks, what, if any, opportunities with the operators, with other operators have with BAI to take wholesale connectivity? To clarify, this would be station-to-station connectivity, not access to the radio or Wi-Fi network.
Well, I honestly think that we're at the foothills, really, of kind of exploring and exploiting this connectivity underground. As the questioner said, you know, first and foremost, it is about providing that mobile connectivity to the masses and also to the emergency service network. But, you know, if there is then, you know, an opportunity or a particular market demand, and working in lockstep with TfL, you know, I'm sure that's something that we can, you know, explore in due course.
Okay, and then we have one other question, and I hope we've got time for this. It's from Anand Gupta. What are the revenue options?
I think I'd probably have to also jointly answer that with Garry. It's probably a little unclear from the question as to what that means.
Perhaps this is something to discuss with you at Pints and Packets at the end of the session then.
Yes, yeah, I think need more clarity on what the question's referring to.
Excellent. In that case, I'm going to hand back to Portia as chair. Thank you very much for speaking.
Thank you.
Thank you.